8 o'clock. It's 8 o'clock, and so I think we can probably start. I know that Rabbi Reagan is not here at the moment. He's in a minyan. So for those of you that don't know me, I think everyone does know me actually. But for those of you that don't know me, my name's Bev Sacho, and tonight I'm doing something a little bit different. We have for the last few months, actually, over the whole lockdown period in Melbourne, done series on Ashkenazi Judaism and series on Sephardi Jewish history. So this is a bit different. Tonight we are doing ancient Jewish history. So I'm a medieval Jewish history person. So this is a little bit different for me, but I'm very happy to be doing some ancient Greek and classical history tonight. So I think we've got people here already in this talk. So tonight I'm doing the story of Chanukah, and it's the story behind the story of Chanukah. So it's hopefully a little bit different to what you do know of the story of Chanukah, and hopefully you're going to learn some new and novel information about Chanukah itself, which is coming up in a very short time. So if you have a look at this picture here, I thought it was a little bit symbolic that I had this picture on my title page. I am sharing the screen. I hope you can all see my screen. Yes, you can see the screen. Excellent. Okay, so we're looking here through some beautiful Greek ancient architecture with some Ionic columns, and we are having a look at a ruin. In the background, we've got a modern city. And in front of the ruin, we've got a menorah and a Chanukah. And hopefully that's going to be a little bit of the background to what we're going to be talking about tonight. So we all know, I'm just going to go out of this, stop the share for a moment. Okay, so we all know the story of Chanukah. All right, we all know about the miracle of the lights and the fact that there was enough oil for one night, and we had enough oil for 8 nights. The oil actually burned for 8 nights, which we celebrate as the miracle of Chanukah. That's why we eat food that's got lots of oil. We have donuts and we have latkes, and it's a beautiful holiday. Everyone loves celebrating Chanukah, delicious food, and lighting candles. What could be nicer? And so this is the way that we've celebrated Chanukah over the years. It's all been about the light. And if you have a look in the Talmud, you'll see tons and tons of information about how to light, which way to light from, which brachot you should say when you light. There's so many halachot on the laws of Chanukah, how to do everything, but there's very, very little information on the story of Chanukah. So there must be a reason for this. Why have the rabbis taken the light, the whole miracle of the light, that whole story, rather than the miracle of the battles? Because actually the miracle of Chanukah was really that there was a very, very small army of Jewish Maccabees, of Jewish fighters, that managed to outmaneuver this giant Greek army. And so hopefully we're going to investigate tonight why it's all become about the oil and about the miracle of the lights and not about the miracle of the battles. So let's look at some of the reasons maybe behind this. So the story is not as simple as it's made out to be. So everything that you learned in Hebrew school or at day school is probably just the tip of the iceberg. You have to go much deeper than that. So that could be one of the reasons that we just do the oil as the surface, and we don't delve deeply into the history. The other thing is that the history itself is difficult to find. Remember, I said it's not in the Talmud, really, not much on the history in the Talmud, lots of laws, but not much about the history. You really have to look at some other sources to find the information that you're looking for, and so it's not easily available. Also, we're celebrating a miracle of the temple being rededicated, but we know that the temple was destroyed. So how do we celebrate a holiday of rededication, of having a beautiful temple, when we actually, like, we don't have a temple because it was destroyed actually not long after the Chanukah miracle. So it's sort of more important when we're living in exile to be able to see the hand of God in the miracle of the lights rather than in the miracle of the battles that led up to this miracle of the lights. So where do we know the story of Chanukah from? I'm going to hopefully share the screen and found something here. All right, so where do we look to find this information? We can look at Maccabees. So Maccabees have two books, Maccabees 1 and Maccabees 2, which is not in the Tanakh. Somehow the two books of the Maccabees never made it into Tanakh. It's in what we call the Apocrypha. So it's made it into many Christian Bibles, but it doesn't make it into our Tanakh for reasons that we're going to discuss later. A lot of the history is in the book of Maccabees. We really have to look at the book of Maccabees to understand and to get a good idea of the history. It's a little bit different in Maccabees 1 and Maccabees 2, which makes it very difficult, actually, to know the chronological order of the history because they are a little bit different. But at least we know with the Maccabees, with the book of the Maccabees, it was actually written by someone that was living at that time, and someone that was actually in the army of Yehuda HaMaccabee. So it's very credible information. Sometimes you get slightly different orders. Okay, then this picture down here, I don't know if you can see that. I'm pointing to a picture. This is a man called Josephus. So I'm sure you've all heard of Josephus. Josephus was actually a Jewish general who was fighting with the rebels against the Romans. So this is not the Greek times, this is the Roman times. And he landed up working for the Romans as their historian. And he became really the expert on anything Jewish and ancient history of the Jewish people. So the Romans needed to know any information about Jews, they went to Josephus. And Josephus gives us, even today, incredible and valuable information about Jewish history from ancient times, all the way up to the War of Rome. And he's written 20 volumes of a book called Jewish Antiquities. So we know a lot of this information from Josephus. The problem is that Josephus is writing for a Roman audience. He's not writing for a Jewish audience. So sometimes we get slightly skewed information. We have to be aware of that when we are looking at this information. Then again, we've also got here the page of the Talmud, lots of halakha, but not information on the history. And then, of course, with history, you always want to find artifacts. So if you have artifacts, or if you have ruins, or if you have archaeological digs, that's the best way to find information on events that happened in history. We can date them now, and so we can tell a lot of information just from just by looking at artifacts. This one on top here is a ruin from Modi'in, ancient Modi'in, which is actually not exactly where Modi'in is today. And these coins over here are from the Maccabee times. So let's look at what time we're actually looking at. Because we always talk in Chanukah about the miracle against the Greeks. Okay, the Maccabees were this Jewish army that defeated the big Greek army. Okay, but were they actually Greek? They weren't from Greece. So let's look back at this period of history that we call, in Jewish history, this is called the Second Temple period. And it runs from -500 all the way to 0. So 500 BCE all the way through to 0. So it's a 500-year period. We often break up Jewish history in 500-year periods, and this is the period that we're talking about. So for the Common Era, okay, BC. And it all starts with Alexander the Great, who's born in 356 and dies as a very young man in 323. So Alexander's dad, Philip of Macedon, so even he wasn't Greek, right? They were Macedonian. Philip of Macedon is the one that united all these little Greek states. There were lots of little Greek towns and city-states, polises, they called them. They coalesced them, they joined them together. Philip of Macedon did this in the dream of uniting Greece, the whole of Greece, into one nation, and then following there to go and conquer the world. unfortunately, he died, and then he left this job to his son Alexander to do. So Alexander the Great was a brilliant military general, an amazing military general, also was an intellectual. His teacher, believe it or not, was Aristotle. So I guess most of us, if our teacher was Aristotle, would probably not be okay. But Alexander the Great learned with Aristotle, got a lot of his ideas of Hellenism, philosophy, science, because in those days philosophy was science as well, and natural sciences. And he learned everything from him, and had great ideas of expansion, of expanding his empire to the whole known world. He, of course, invaded Persia, and Persia was a giant empire at the time. So he took over the whole of the Persian Empire. He took Israel, he took Syria, he took Egypt. He went all the way through to India, okay, Afghanistan. You can see, if you have a look at that picture, you can see how far that empire actually went. The only problem with Alexander is that he died very young. He died, we think, of alcohol poisoning, actually, which is very, very sad, because he actually could have done a lot in his lifetime, but he didn't lead the healthiest lifestyle, and unfortunately he died. And he didn't have any heirs because he was very young. And so what happens after Alexander is the empire then splits into three. It actually splits into a little bit more, but there's some independent generals who sort of not part of this whole, not part of empires, they're just like little independent states. So we've got to look over here how, if you look at this map, you'll see the three empires that really come from Alexander the Great's Greek Empire. And you'll see that when we're dealing with this Greek Empire that we talk about in the story of the Maccabees, we're actually not talking about Greeks. These are not Greeks. These are Syrian Greeks, or Syrians, not Assyrians, so not the Assyrians from way back when in biblical times. These are Syrians, and this dynasty is called the Seleucid dynasty. Okay, because the general, so when Alexander's empire split, it split amongst his generals. So his generals were Ptolemy, Seleucid, and Antigonid. So we've got the Ptolemaic Empire, we've got the Seleucid Empire, and we've got the Antigonid Empire. And Israel, you'll see, so the land of Judea, the land of Judah, is actually sitting in a very precarious place. It sits at the end of the Mediterranean here. And so Greece, we can see, is on the west, and then we've got sort of Asia Minor and Egypt down at the bottom. And Israel sits on the cusp of where the Ptolemaic Empire and the Seleucid Empire meet. Can't see these pictures here because I think we're in the way. So now maybe you can see some of the pictures. This guy over here on top, this is Ptolemy. Now there were many, of course there were many, Ptolemy or Ptolemies, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Actually look that up, and there's multiple ways of pronouncing this. But there were many Ptolemies. So every single emperor in the Ptolemaic Empire was called Ptolemy. So first one is Ptolemy Soter, and this guy over here is Ptolemy Philadelphus, who was Ptolemy II. He's the important one that we need to know for our story. And this over here is Antiochus, but this is not the Antiochus from the Chanukah story. This is Antiochus III, also known as Antiochus the Great. He was head of the Seleucid Empire. The Seleucid empires had, most of the empires were either called Seleucus or Antiochus. Okay, so you'll hear lots of these names, but they're not, they're not always the same people, so don't get confused. The one from the Chanukah story is Antiochus IV, okay, otherwise known as Antiochus Epiphanes, which of course he called himself Antiochus Epiphanes, like the great, the amazing, and we'll see why. And this one over here down at the bottom is Antigone. We don't have a bust of him as far as I could see. He's on a coin. Now I'm going to move that over there. And all right, now, so you can see we're sitting in this precarious place here in Judea. And the important thing is that both the Ptolemaic and the Seleucid Empire want us. And so there are constant wars between the Ptolemaic and the Seleucid Empire to get Judea. So whilst the Jews are living there, like mostly doing their own thing in this very sort of agrarian society, a little bit of an urban sort of some urban areas. Jerusalem, of course, is urbanized, but most of the Jews are living in rural areas, so just doing their own thing. And most of the time, we're living under the Ptolemies. So, and actually under Philadelphia, that's one, we have this bust up here of Philadelphia, Ptolemy Philadelphia, the second. Here's a really, they have an interesting, lovely form of Hellenism, and we're going to discuss Hellenism in a moment. Their ideas are, it's like a much more sort of glitzy Hellenism. They don't force anything on anyone. They just tell everyone how wonderful and amazing Hellenism is. They are into art and into literature and into drama and into philosophy. They're building beautiful cities throughout Judea. And Ptolemy II forms a very strong relationship with some wealthy Jews in Judea. And this is very, very important because this is going to be the crux of the whole Chanukah story. This is how it all happens. So there's wealthy Jews, of course, there's wealthy Jews and poor Jews. The wealthy Jews are mostly living in Jerusalem. Many of them are connected to the temple family. Okay, so the families of the high priests, they're wealthy and they're very closely connected to Ptolemy II. There's also a lot of wealthy families that are tax farmers in, stop sharing, I can talk a little bit better. There's a lot of families that are tax farming. So they're collecting taxes from the people for Ptolemy, and then they're making profit out of the money that they then give back to Ptolemy. So they get paid well, and they become wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. They become an upper class. And of course, who are they connected to? Are they more connected to Jews, or they're more connected to the Ptolemies? Well, you know, their money is coming from the Ptolemies, so that's where their affection lies. It doesn't lie with the average Jew who's a farmer in rural areas. So very connected to the Ptolemies and very influenced in terms of Hellenism. So these are, when we talk about Hellenistic Jews, these are the Jews that embrace Greek culture, right? The ones that are very closely connected to the Ptolemies. I've gone way ahead of my notes. Put it here. And as I said before, the Ptolemies had this sort of like a nicer, gentler, more appealing form of Hellenism. So we're going to discuss now what exactly is Hellenism, because you have to understand Hellenism to understand what happened at this time, and to understand that we're actually, unfortunately, still living with Hellenism today. It forms very, very much part of modern society. Some parts of Hellenism. We don't still have Greek gods around. Okay, so Hellenism really was a new view of man. Okay, man was the center of thought. Man's body and women's bodies were very important. How you looked was very important. Beauty was important. Beauty in architecture, beauty in literature, the way that words sounded and the way they got put together, poetry became very important. Drama was very important, and sport was the most important. So sport was everything. In fact, you know, you went to school, you went to a gymnasium. Of course, not for girls. This is all for boys. You went to a gymnasium. A gymnasium was where you learned everything that you needed to know. But pretty much the gymnasium was where you learned sport, and you learned how to fight, and you learned how to wrestle, and you learned how to showcase your body to the best of its ability. And this really was what Hellenism was highly focused on the body. Now, of course, there's Greek gods, and you'll see throughout Hellenistic architecture, there's temples everywhere, and there's beautiful pictures. I'll show you some pictures in a moment. Beautiful pictures of statues of the gods. The gods were very important in terms of keeping the culture together. But the Greeks, by the time it came to Alexander the Great, especially the intellectual Greeks, was they understood that the gods lived like a parallel sort of universe. If you think back to Greek mythology that you might have learned at school, the Greek gods are not, they're not watching carefully what's happening on earth and looking at everybody's behavior, and you've got to be a very good person, and you've got to do everything to be holy, and all the things that we have in Judaism, where you're trying to better yourself to and God is looking out on you and is watching you, and you have to behave because of fear of God as well. So you've got sort of a loving God and a God that you fear. The Greek gods were living in Olympus, misbehaving often. You know, they've got all their own stories. They behave like people behave, but they're gods. So it's like two parallel universes. So of course, like the sacrifices and that sort of thing was important, but people didn't at that stage really believe that the gods had a huge influence on their everyday behavior. So because it was human-centered, you know, what they did was important. And they mocked the gods a lot. A lot of the Greek mythology's got, you know, has got stories where the gods are bad, and you know, you sort of look down on the gods. They do some stupid things. So let me just share the screen for a moment. And we'll look at some things that Hellenism gave us. Okay, so, you know, beautiful architecture. We've got some beautiful, you know, Greek columns here and buildings, magnificent buildings. This is a ruin of a gymnasium. I'm going to move you guys, and then you can, oh, help. You can, oh, wow, moved one. Let's go back. Okay, we've got a gymnasium down, a ruin of a gymnasium down the bottom there. You can see how huge that gymnasium is. And then, of course, we've got incredible Greek philosophers, amazing Greek philosophers. We've got Socrates first, and then we've got Plato, and then we've got Aristotle. You know, these are giving us, you know, ideas of human behavior and how we think and how we understand things. So Hellenism is very attractive to, and of course, here's, you know, here's the statue of the human body. Hellenism is very attractive to most cultures. It was just, you know, a much higher sort of culture than anything else going at the time, and very different to Jewish culture. But a lot of Jews were very enticed by Hellenism and excited by Hellenism, and felt that Jews should actually be more Hellenistic, not less Hellenistic. And there start to be really big divisions in the people between who are the opponents of Hellenism and who are for Hellenism. And it was generally the wealthy ones that were benefiting from Hellenism and wanted to be more Hellenistic. And the religious ones, the rural ones, or the poorer ones who weren't getting anything from Hellenism, clung more to Torah and found a lot of things in Hellenism abhorrent. So, you know, do we still have Hellenism today? I just thought I'd just show you some things in the next picture. Of course. So we're still living in a society which is actually has the same values as they had in the times of Chanukah, just in case we're doing, you know, we think we're doing ancient history and we have advanced so much since then. You know, it's still about the human body. People spend, I had to be very careful when what I put on the screen here. There were, you know, lots of bodybuilding pictures which I couldn't put on, but, you know, I've got a cartoon. So, you know, bodybuilding, all about glorifying the body, making yourself look better. Your image is all important. The Olympics is all about, you know, showcasing the human body. Look how fast we can go. Look how high we can jump. All these amazing things that we can do. That's still part of Hellenism. You know, here's a picture of the MCG. You know, sport is very important. In Australia, we live in a highly, you know, sports-orientated culture. There's some Botox about to happen. So, you know, beauty is very important. We want to look beautiful. Here's a picture of science and maths, which is very much what, you know, the Greeks gave us this. They gave us science and maths and lots of and philosophy and drama and literature. Here's a picture of Parliament House. We can see it's actually built in Greek classical architecture. So yes, we're still living in, actually, especially today, we're living in a society which still has a lot of the same values as they had at the time of the Chanukah story. Okay. Also, everyone always goes, the Greeks gave us democracy, well, and parliament, but it was not the sort of democracy that we know today. It was, you know, democracy for the upper echelon, not for the masses. So it was a slave culture. If you didn't agree, you could be replaced very easily. And of course, it wasn't for the masses. It was only for the elite. So, all right. So let's have a look here. Most Jews, I'm just going to stop sharing for a second. So most Jews, as I said before, were not Hellenistic. Important to know that most were not, but many were. Okay, and there really starts to become a division between the two groups that becomes progressively more and more and more of a thing until the Chanukah story happens, and even after. So this becomes a battleground. So it's a culture war that then develops into a civil war. All right. So but it definitely starts as a culture war between essentially the secularists, those people that want to have the culture more like Greek culture, and the religious ones who are the observant ones who want to have Jewish culture more like traditional Jewish culture. So it really becomes a culture war between the traditionalists and like what we would know today as the secularists. Culture war, which then becomes a civil war. All right, so now what happens, because my next slide is called the perfect storm. The perfect storm is about to happen, and that happens in the Chanukah story. So in 199 BCE, remember we're going back downwards in numbers because we're going backwards. So minus 300 around that time was Alexander, right? At 323 died. Now we all the way now, and then we've had Seleucid and we've had Ptolemy, and now we're all the way into 199. And in 199, the Seleucid Empire takes over Judea. So this is problematic for a number of people. Firstly, remember I said the Ptolemaics, like they had this like nice form of Hellenism. Well, the Seleucids, nothing was as glittery with the Seleucids. If they wanted you to be Hellenistic, they forced you to be Hellenistic. There was nothing appealing, and we should try and convince you. If they decided you were going to be Hellenist, you were going to be Hellenist, and if they decided you weren't going to be Jewish, you weren't going to be Jewish. So it was like a totally different society. Now Judea has fallen under them. So Seleucid III, he was the first one. Remember I showed you that bust of Seleucid? He was called Seleucid the Great. He was the one that then conquered Judea. And initially he said, all right, you know what, you're new people and we're new, so we're going to be nice to you, and you can keep Judaism, you can do whatever you want, just pay us taxes. But then what happened was Rome started becoming more powerful at this time, and Seleucid started having a lot of wars and conflict with Rome. And to stop that conflict, he had to pay Rome. And how did he pay Rome? With taxes from Judea. So he started to tax the Judeans more and more and more. Now, nobody likes tax. And so, of course, you're not going to like the emperor that's taxing you too much. So he loses favor with the people. And he starts to be not as friendly as he was initially because he's under a fortune of pressure from Rome. He also gives his son as hostage to Rome. His son is none other than Antiochus IV, who is the evil Antiochus that we know from the Chanukah story. So, all right, so Antiochus IV is currently in Rome. Seleucid has taken over and is taxing the Jews like crazy. And of course, the Hellenists are trying to ingratiate themselves now with the Seleucids, because remember, they had this very close relationship with the Ptolemies. Now they have to make close relationships with the Seleucids. So what they do is they try and give them gifts. They try and, of course, many of the gifts are sitting in the temple because the temple has got temple treasures. But the Seleucids don't know that just yet. Along comes, we have a high priest at the time called Honia, or Onias. And Honia is the high priest, and there's a position, a very prestigious position that needs to get chosen at the time in Jerusalem, and he appoints a non-Hellenist to this role. And there was a Hellenist by the name of Simon. You can see there's a Hellenist. He has a Greek name, Simon. He picks a non-Hellenist, and Simon is highly offended. So what does Simon do? He goes straight to Seleucid, and he says, look, I was supposed to get chosen for this role, but I want to tell you something. If you chose me for this role, there's tons of treasures sitting in the temple. If you want, you want anything, you need money, go and get it from the temple. It's loaded with gold. So of course, Seleucid, he needs money. He's thinking, okay, he'll go and get the temple gold. The Jews at this stage are devastated. They can't actually believe what's happened, and riots start happening. And this is like the beginning of the civil war. So Chonya, he decides he's going to go and fix this all up, and he goes to Seleucid. Okay, Seleucid the fourth is living in. He is currently living. So this is not Antiochus the third. This is now Seleucid the fourth, because Antiochus the third has died, and his son Seleucid, because his other son is in Rome, right? Hostage in Rome. So Seleucid becomes the king, and Seleucid is now getting, people showing up there promising him gifts, and he needs money too. So Chonya arrives there, and Chonya says, "Look, you can't take this. You can't take the temple gold. There's going to be a civil war. Just don't do it. Don't do any of this." Okay, now an amazing thing happens. Whilst Chonya is in Antioch, in the Seleucid Empire, visiting Seleucus the fourth, Seleucus the fourth dies. He's assassinated, and now this is when the perfect storm happens. Okay, I'm going to share my screen right now. All right, and I'll move this a little bit over so we can see something. Okay. All right, now, just to show you where everyone is, we are now currently sitting in Antioch, okay? We're sitting in Antioch in the Seleucid Empire with the new king, who is none other than Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus the fourth. He is the evil Antiochus from the Chanukah story. I don't know if you can see everything. I'm going to just put it there. Otherwise, I can't see the pictures. This picture over here is a coin of Antiochus IV. Just to give you a little bit of information about Antiochus IV. Now, remember, he was a hostage in Rome. He was a child when he was taken to Rome. He's grown up as a hostage in Rome. That is not usually going to be a good thing for a person. So he's been brought up with a lot of trauma. That's the first thing. He has real problems with needing love and needing affection, and he does strange things like pretend that he is a common man and go to bathhouses and hang out with the people. There's some really bizarre stories that we've heard of Antiochus, but I'm not going to go into all of them tonight. But he was a very strange, eccentric character. He wasn't, your usual king. And anyway, he knows absolutely nothing of Judea, and he knows nothing about what's happening. But he knows that Chonya is there, and whilst Chonya is there, another emissary comes, and it is none other than a message from Jason. Okay, now you can hear, if you've got a name like Chonya, it's going to be like a from Jewish name. If you've got a name like Jason, it's going to be a Hellenized name. All right, so Jason has placed himself on the position of the high priest. Okay, he is Chonya's brother. His name is Jason. He's a Hellenizer, and he has decided that he is now the high priest. Now, he sends messages to Antiochus IV, and says to him, "Look, if you make me high priest, I will give you the temple treasures. Not only that, I will Hellenize the people. Not only that, I will build a gymnasium on the Temple Mount. Anything that you want, I'll do. I'll force Hellenism. Everyone will be singing your praises. Make me the high priest." Of course, Antiochus IV, because yes, Jason's the new high priest. But Jason then becomes a high priest for a very short time, because of course he wasn't Hellenistic enough for the rest of the Hellenistic population, who then the messenger for Jason was none other than a man called Menelaus. Okay, it's confusing names. But Menelaus is a very important name to remember because Menelaus then becomes the high priest. He had been the messenger for Jason, but he thought, oh, why should Jason then be the high priest? I could actually be the high priest. So he goes to Antioch and he says to Antiochus the fourth, make me the high priest. I'll give you all the treasures. I'll increase the taxes. I'll put an idol in the temple if we need to, and I'm going to dedicate the temple to Zeus. I can do anything that you want. So of course Antiochus, he doesn't know anything about Judaism, and this is just one tiny little province in his giant empire. So he says, okay, I'll have Menelaus as my high priest. Now Menelaus becomes the high priest, and he doesn't even have any of the yichus that Jason had, and Jason was pretty bad, but Jason was nothing compared to Menelaus. Menelaus is shocking, and the Jews are devastated with Menelaus. So now we've got Antioch here, Antiochus the fourth, who's crazy, right? Remember, he calls himself Antiochus Epiphanes, which means that the illustrious. Other people call him Antiochus Epimanes, which means the mad. Then we've got the temple here, where all these crazy things are happening. This is not, when we think of the Beis Hamikdash and this holy of holies, this holy place, this is not how we think of the temple, okay? All these crazy things are happening there. There's idols there, there's idol worship there, there's sacrifices happening to unclean animals, to unkosher animals. There's gymnasiums everywhere. And of course, in the gymnasium, forgot to mention before, in the gymnasium, of course, there are only men, but everyone's naked in the gymnasium. You don't wear clothes in the gymnasium. So of course you can see who's Jewish. Of course you can see who's Jewish, right? And some of these men have done operations now to uncircumcise themselves, so they'll look more Greek. This is happening in the gymnasium. I mean, it's very hard to imagine that this is what's happening in what we consider this holy, holy, holy place on Temple Mount in the Beis Hamikdash. So, and this is a Jew that's doing this. This is not Antiochus at this stage. And of course, the traditional Jews, the rabbis are going crazy with everything that's happening. And a war starts, a civil war starts. Antiochus decides at this stage, he doesn't know anything, he knows there's a civil war, but he's like not too fussed about it. He decides he is going to be better than his dad, and he is going to go and take Egypt. So he musters this giant army, and he takes it through Judea, because of course that's the way to get from the Seleucid Empire down to Egypt. You've got to go through Judea. He's going through Judea, and he's waiting to invade the Ptolemaic Empire, Egypt. And he gets a message from Rome, right? Remember, he grew up in Rome. He's scared of Rome. He was a hostage in Rome. And Rome is this emerging power now. Rome is more powerful than the Seleucid Empire. And so Rome says, no, you can't invade the Ptolemaic Empire. Why does Rome say that? Not because they don't like Antiochus IV, and they really don't care what happens to the Jews or really what happens to the Egyptians. They do not want one power in that region becoming too strong. Because of course, if the Seleucids take the Ptolemaic Empire, then they've got they've got this massive, massive empire all the way from, from the east, all the way from India, all the way, down to Egypt and Libya. It's, it's huge. So Rome can't have that. So Rome says, no, you actually can't have the Ptolemaic Empire. If you decide to invade the Ptolemaic Empire, we'll invade you. So Antiochus, now he's got this giant army, which he's mustered and paid a lot of money for. And he doesn't know what to do with his army, and now he cannot invade the Ptolemaic Empire. And of course, there's a civil war happening in Jerusalem, and it's kind of annoying for him because why are these Jews not accepting Hellenism like everyone else accepts Hellenism? Why are they having problems with it? So he takes his army and he decides he's going to put down the civil war, right? Now, the Jews made a big mistake. They make lots of mistakes right throughout this period, but made a big mistake. The big mistake they made is they've heard about this diplomatic disaster with Antiochus. And they go, well, Rome didn't let him invade, so he is going back to Syria with his tail between his legs. So Jason, remember Jason? He was the one who decided he was the high priest, the brother of Konya. Jason decides now it's time for him to muster an army, and he goes into Jerusalem to go and defeat Menelaus. And lots of Jews go with him as well to go and defeat Menelaus. But of course, Menelaus runs to a fortress which is right near the temple called the Akra, and Jason can't get him. Jason's like hugely frustrated that he didn't get Menelaus. He doesn't know that Antiochus is coming. He lets his army, his private army, loose on the innocent civilians in Jerusalem. So there's like murder happening left, right, and center of Jews on Jews. These are Jews killing Jews. This is the person that was the high priest killing Jews. And the other high priest, who's holed himself up in the Akra, is sitting watching Jews die because he is the high priest and he shouldn't be. So major civil war. Antiochus comes in, he sees it, he decides this is he's had enough. He gets his army to come in. They apparently, according to the book of Maccabees, killed 80,000 civilians. 80,000 civilians in 3 days. That's crazy. In the book of Maccabees, they mention women, they mention children, young, old, they didn't care. The Seleucid army came in and literally killed tons, thousands of people in Jerusalem. And then, of course, they ruin the temple. They make it into a Greek temple. They put a big statue of Zeus there. They defile the temple. They put pigs as sacrifices. And this is when Antiochus starts to go even more mad than he was before. What happens to him is he decides that he is going to be the one that crushes Judaism. There will be no Judaism left, and then he'll have no more problems after this. So he doesn't only do this in Jerusalem, he makes many, many, many laws. Okay, these laws then are the laws that we know of that happened just before the Chanukah rebellion, before the Maccabee rebellion. So he says no Shabbat, no Brit Milah, no Rosh Chodesh, no Jewish holidays, none of those. No kashrut, no family purity laws. Pigs are the only animals to be sacrificed. Anything that you can think of that's completely not Judaism, it's going to be idled in the temple, but not just this temple, any temple. Like wherever there are Jews, there's going to be temples and people are going to be sacrificing to the Greek gods, and they're going to be sacrificing pigs. And there are Jews that they know, and they killed. We know the story of Hannah and her sons. Hannah and her sons, this is from this era. So people that disobeyed, people that circumcised their children were killed with their children. There's horrific stories of this, and Antiochus was a terrible man, crazy, terrible, awful man that initiated this just mass killing and tried to actually take Judaism away from the Jews. So he didn't necessarily want to kill all the Jews. It wasn't like to annihilate Jews, but it was to annihilate Judaism. He just wanted to get Judaism out of the Jews, pretty much. But he had not brought it on. It had been brought on by civil war. And what he did was he then allied to the Jewish Hellenists. So the Jewish Hellenists in Jerusalem and in some other towns allied with Antiochus against their own, against other Jews. And they thought that by doing this, they would ingratiate themselves with Antiochus. He would finance them. They would do business with him. He would provide them with Greek culture, which they liked. They preferred the Greek culture. And they felt they had more in common now with the Seleucids than they actually, or with Hellenistic people, than they did with Jews. Okay, now along comes Mattathiyahu. So what happens is there's this tiny little town, it's like a little village called Modi'in, quite near Jerusalem. I think it was 12 miles west or something like that from Jerusalem. And one of the generals goes to Modi'in and insists that the priest there makes a sacrifice to a pig, makes a sacrifice of a pig to the gods. And of course, the priest, and there's a whole priestly family living there, the priest is none other than Mattathiyahu. So Mattathiyahu, who's surname sort of would be Hashmonaim, the Hasmonaim or Hasmonian, as we know in English. Not called the Maccabees yet, but he basically says no, he's not going to sacrifice it. Another Jew comes up, a Hellenized Jew, says, sure, no problem, I'll sacrifice the pig. And at that stage, Matityahu kills the Jew, kills the general that asked for the Jew to do it, and says basically, whoever's with me, join me now. And they did, and ran into he took his 5 sons, he had 5 sons, ran into the bush, into the hills, which was their territory. They lived in the Judean hills, they knew the Judean hills, they understood it, and they started to form a small, very, very small army of guerrilla soldiers. So it wasn't like an army. They were going to do small little hit and run attacks, but really over that first year, not much happened. Just tiny little incursions here and there. And of course, Matityahu was very old, and he died a year after this particular event happened. And he left the mantle to his 3rd son, who was Yehuda. And Yehuda, who we know as Yehuda HaMaccabee, the Maccabee means, well, we don't know exactly why they call themselves Maccabees, but it means a hammer in Greek, Maccabee, or it could come from Milchamocha Ba'alim Hashem. So that's where you could get the word Maccabee. We don't know exactly, only know it now. And they formed this band of guerrilla soldiers doing guerrilla warfare in the Judean desert. And they start basically by going into villages and getting rid of the Hellenists. They're not going against any Seleucids at the moment, or if I call them Syrian Greeks, we could call them Syrian Greeks. They're not Greeks, Syrian Greeks. So they start by going into the little villages, and they basically go, have you brised your child? And if not, we'll take care of that, which they did. And if the parents objected, they took care of the parents as well. So Yehuda Maccabee was very definite about what he did. There was nothing was wishy-washy. He was very firm. He knew what he wanted. He was a brilliant army general, very intelligent. He and he had a very clear mind. He knew what he wanted, and he was going to translate his religious fervor into his warfare as a soldier. Okay, so what does Yehuda do at this stage? He starts to make more and more. He gets more and more followers, and he makes more of an army. And he really has 2 groups that follow him. There's a group called, I'm just going to stop sharing for a second. I don't need to. There's a group called the Hasidim. So it's not like the Hasidim, from the 1800s or 1700s that we know of now. The Hasidim was a group that believed, that fought very much with Yehuda, but believed that they should fight to the end. So it wasn't just a matter of fighting to get to the status quo of where it was before and get their Judaism back. They believed, that Judea should be an independent state, that you should try and get as much as you can, that the Jews should triumph, they should get rid of the Greek army or the Syrian Greek army. So the Hasidim were very firm in what they believed. Then there was another group, we call them moderate rebels, and these moderate rebels really believed in Yehuda Maccabee. They fought with Yehuda Maccabee, but they were more moderate, and they were happy to negotiate. So they sort of said, well, as soon as we can negotiate, we can get our Judaism back, then we'll get, we'll start fighting. We don't want to fight for no reason. We really don't mind if the Seleucids rule us, but we do want our Judaism back. So they fought, and at some stage, Yehuda had an army of about 6,000 people. I even saw in one of the battles, when I looked at it, it even looked like there could have been 10,000 people, 10,000 soldiers. But of course, these were soldiers. These were farmers. Okay, these were not professional soldiers. These were farmers fighting with farming utensils. Whereas the Syrian Greeks, the Seleucid Greeks, were a professional army moving in a phalanx, as they used to, like a big square. with shields and with spears and lots of weapons, and they were, they were professional, so they knew what they were doing. The only way that Yehuda could have won these battles would have been to use the terrain and to use intelligence, so to use knowledge of where the army was, what they were doing, how they were going to fight. And he used this information. He very much used the terrain. He used these little sort of short, sharp attacks to defeat these large armies, huge armies with a small amount of Maccabean soldiers, who should never have won the war. And in actual fact, this should be the miracle of Chanukah, was that they actually managed to win these battles against the huge armies. It's incredible that they managed to do what they did. Let's look a little bit at the battles. Okay, let's look at the next one here. Okay, so in the background, you can see a picture of the Judean hills, and you can see how hilly it is. So, you have to be pretty fit to fight in these hills, and Yehuda's soldiers were fit. The Greek soldiers were not, Syrian Greeks, were not necessarily as fit, and they were used to fighting on a plain. So in a flat area, they were not used to fighting in the hills. And so Yehuda made sure always he took them into the hills to fight. And that was the only way that he could win. So like the first battle was actually, it says here Lebona, but it's Lebona, it's Ma'ale Lebona. And so that was like the first battle that Yehuda won, and then there was Bet Horon, which Yehuda won, and these were like against big Greek generals. These were not like lower end generals. These were serious generals, like Apollonius and Seron. These were famous generals, but they were losing the battle because they were just like on territory that they didn't really know how to fight, whereas Yehuda did. And then the most interesting and amazing battle is this one at Emmaus. Emmaus is an incredible story. I don't know if I've got 2 seconds to talk about Emmaus, but they're an amazing battle because Yehuda used intelligence to find out what exactly was happening with this army. And the army there was under Georgius and Nicanor and Georgius, very, very famous Seleucid generals, good generals. He heard that they were planning to attack him. So and they'd split their camp at Emmaus, and he was staying in a place called Mitzpeh, and they were moving to Mitzpeh. Half of the army were moving to Mitzpeh to go and attack the Maccabees. He heard about this, so they went down across to Emmaus, and there were these unsuspecting soldiers sitting guarding base camp, and they attacked the base camp and killed all those soldiers and took over that base camp. And then, of course, the soldiers under Nicanor and Georgius had gone all the way to Mitzpeh, and of course there were no Maccabees there. So they came back to base camp, and as they came back into base camp, and just imagine what happened, the Maccabees were sitting there waiting for them, and they finished them off. So this battle was really a very decisive battle, very, very famous battle. But it was not the battle that led to the Chanukah rededication of the temple. There was another battle at Beit Sur. Again, a difficult battle, very, very difficult battle. But there was an amazing general there by the name of Lysias, a Seleucid general who never lost a battle. But he lost this battle at Beit Sur. And after then, he had to, he decided, he lost. And at that stage, you can see Beit Sur is on the way to Jerusalem. So the Jews went, the Maccabean army went back to Jerusalem, and that's when they rededicated the temple and they took over Jerusalem. They landed up, and of course there was, they found a menorah, and they found light enough for 1 day, and miraculously that oil lasted for 8 days. That's the Chanukah story that we know. That happens after the Battle of Beit Sur. And what then happens is the the Maccabees are in Jerusalem. They're now surrounded by Lysias's army, because Lysias has decided to come and, siege Jerusalem. They siege to Jerusalem, and they're also fighting in Jerusalem with the Hellenists. So it's very bad for the Maccabees. And it happened to be a sabbatical year, so there was not so much food, and it was not so good. And then another miraculous thing happened. Lysias got recalled to Antioch, and he left. And when he left, he negotiated with the Jews, and he said, you know what, I'm leaving, I'm not battling this anymore, I've had enough, and I'm going to allow you, I'll give you some independence, had enough of this battle. You can, all the laws of that Antiochus IV made, because Antiochus IV has now died. Around about the time of this battle, he was fighting in Persia. He decided his coffers were running low and he needed more money, and he decided there was money to be had in Persia. He died, actually of a venereal disease, which is maybe why he went mad, interestingly. But Lysias then became, he was the acting regent. Antiochus IV had a little child, Antiochus V, so he couldn't really rule. Lysias is in charge. He gets recalled. That in itself is a miracle, because I think if they had besieged Jerusalem and won the siege, then we wouldn't have the Chanukah story now. But Lysias then gets recalled and negotiates a truce, and we have autonomy, a little bit of autonomy in Judea, and we have Judaism back. So if Judaism had been destroyed at this stage, we certainly wouldn't be here today. But actually, none of the monotheistic religions would be around today, because they all stem from Judaism. So, and this is, of course, BCE. So it's if these events had not happened, we would all be Hellenists. So we'd be living in a completely different society to what we're living in today. Of course, after then, there are a number of other battles, which I'm not going to go into now, but Yehuda's brother Eleazar is killed at a battle called Beit Zechariah, which happens then later on. The Greeks actually had war elephants that they used to battle with. And can you imagine fighting not only a Greek phalanx, but also fighting with war elephants? That would be terrifying. But his brother Eleazar decided that he thought there was a general, an important general on top of one of the elephants, and he put a spear to one of the elephants, and the elephant fell on him, and he died. He was crushed by an elephant. So terrible. And the other brother Yochanan had also been killed in battle, and very unfortunately in 160 BCE, Yehuda is also killed in battle. So now three of the Maccabees have been killed in battle, and we left with the situation where at the end of this tour, the Jews are not quite where they were before, because they have some autonomy and they have the ability to practice Judaism. So Hellenism is still very much happening. They're still very much Hellenized Jews, but there's no terrible laws, from Antiochus IV. So, but they're not in the best of positions, because Yehuda has now died, and Yehuda was their hero. Yehuda was keeping them going. Yehuda had enabled this Chanukah miracle to happen. And next week, I'm going to talk to you about the rest of the Hasmonean dynasty, because we have a Hasmonean dynasty that follows after this. Two brothers, remember there were 5 brothers, so there's another 2 brothers to go, and their children and grandchildren will form what we know as the Hasmonean dynasty, and that is a period of independence, not all good, but a period of independence in the land of Judea, the only independence that we have in the land of Judea, really until the land of Israel, until Israel, Eretz Israel, and Medinat Israel is established in 1948. So that was our last independence. And next week, I hope to tell you all about those stories. There are amazing stories. The Hasmonean dynasty is full of intrigue and full of intrigue and amazing stories. I just thought I'd just finish very quickly, but by just summing up and saying it really was a civil war that caused these events to happen. It wasn't just some crazy Greek general who was not even Greek, he was Seleucid. It was a civil war. It was Jews fighting against Jews. And whenever Jews are not united, whenever they fight against each other, we have problems, always. And worse, whenever Jews invite a foreign nation to come in and sort out their own problems, it always lands up with problems. Always. Every time in Jewish history, when we have invited a foreign nation to come in and sort things out for us, it's landed up seriously problematic. And a foreign intervention ultimately causes devastation. We need to be able to get on, and we need to be able to be united. And so really Chanukah is a message for us of unity, that we need to be united. We must be together and act as one to be successful and to remain a strong, united Jewish nation. And even though the victories were short-lived, the light of the menorah and the light of Torah still continues till today. And that is why we are here today, because of that hope, that hope that the light gave us, that Hashem is with us. And if we will continue, to keep what we keep, then we'll be okay and stay united.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Bev, for a wonderful view.
So yeah, hopefully I'll see you next week.
Yes, everyone join us.
I can't hear you, Rabbi. I can see you.
Yeah, for some reason you can't hear. I don't know why, but I think everyone else can hear me. So we just want to thank Bev. I know she can't hear for some reason. But
can anyone else hear the Rabbi?
Yeah, they can all hear me.
You can. Only not me. Okay, I'm deliberate. Luckily, you haven't got a mask on.
So I'm thanking you, Bev, and yes, join us next week, this same time for part 2. And of course, stay in tune with all the other events that are going on. And thank you once again to Bev for her insights and her explanations. Obviously, always very engaging and very interesting. So we'll see you next week, B'ezrat Hashem.